Hello and welcome to the second video. Sometimes the goal of using measures of central tendency is to provide a quick summary picture of what your data looks like by looking at all the members in the data set at once. Other times you're trying to compare measures of central tendency between different groups. So for instance, if you were interested in the average income, you could compare the mean between married, never married, widowed, divorced, etc. This can also be done with medians. So this is an important function that can be carried out in SPSS as well. Not only looking at the mean for everybody or the median for everybody, but other measures of central tendency broken down by group. So we can find measures of central tendency for groups by checking out a new function. By going to the menu bar and clicking Analyze, and then going down to the third option on the drop-down menu, we can roll over to that first option and click Means. A dialog box appears, and in the top center you see a box called Dependent List. This is the outcome variable, or the variable that you're interested in comparing across different groups. So income across different groups, number of crimes across different groups, number of days since you've committed a particular crime. So there are a variety of ways and different variables you can compare across different groups. So in this instance, let's compare the amount of time spent at bars in the evening. We're familiar with that variable already. So I'm going to scroll down, find spend evening in bars, and we're going to compare that variable across different groups. The variable that has the groups you're interested in goes into the independent box. So in this instance, let's go with marital status. So I'm going to scroll up, find marital status, and click independent. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare the amount of time spent at bars in the evening across different groups, across married, never married, single, widowed, etc. I'm going to go to the top right hand corner of the dialog box and click Options. In this instance, you're picking which statistics you want to compare across the groups. Notice that default is mean, number of cases, and standard deviation. This variable that we're analyzing in the dependent list is not an interval or ratio level measure, and so a mean is inappropriate. So actually, let's take that mean and move it back over here. Additionally, because we're examining an ordinal level measure, we don't need standard deviation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose median, move it over, and this lists all the other statistics that you can choose. Notice that is absent from this list is the mode, and so you really wouldn't compare modes across groups using this function. It doesn't allow for it. So again, this is a tool mainly used for interval and ratio level measures and ordinal levels of measurement. So once I've got the median number of cases, I'm going to click Continue and then click OK. What you see in the output window is the number of cases in the first box that were examined, 662, and then 838 were considered excluded, and then 1,500 total. The second box is the one where we see the different comparisons between the medians. So for instance, for married people, the median value is 7, which if you recall was never. For widowed people, the typical or median value is 7. For divorced, 6. They go out a little more often, or they go out some. Separated people also go out some. Never married people go out on average a few times a year. So what we see here is that never married and separated and divorced all go out more often than married and widowed people. So this is one way to compare groups on a measure of central tendency. So on average, never married people have more frequent outings at bars in the evening. So let's do a group comparison for number of hours spent watching TV. So let's go back to Analyze, and we'll do Compare Means. Select Means, and we'll spend evening at the bar. We'll move that out of our dependent list and watch hours per day watching TV. I'm going to go to the Options button in the top right-hand corner and move the median back over to this list. And I do want the mean in this instance, and I also want standard deviation. Standard deviation is a good thing to compare across groups. It tells you if one group is squarely fixed around the measure of central tendency or not fixed, clustered around it in a much wider way. So for instance, if a standard deviation for one group was very small around whatever measure there was, most people in that group are near that measure of central tendency. However, if they have a very large standard deviation compared to all the other groups, that means their scores are spread out, and then the mean is somewhat less representative of that group compared to the other groups. So smaller standard deviations lead you to believe that the mean is representative of that group. Larger standard deviations lead you to believe that the mean is somewhat less representative because scores are scattered about a little more. So I'm going to click Continue and then click OK. So I'm going to scroll down to the second box, and I see that on average, separated people have the highest mean with 4.6. Widowed people have the second highest average with 3.4 hours. Never married people have the third highest mean with 3.1 hours. Divorced people have 2.95 hours on average, and married people have 2.51 hours on average. Notice that the standard deviations are not too terribly different from one another, except for separated people. Separated people have a standard deviation of 4, which suggests their scores are much more spread about than compared to the other groups. So married and divorced, just by looking at their standard deviations, have the tightest grouping of scores around the mean. The other groups are a little more spread apart, and clearly the separated scores are much more spread apart and don't fall near the mean as often as the other groups. A second way to get group comparisons is actually with a graph. So this was a table form of getting group means and medians. Another way is with graphs. So I'm going to go to Graphs, and go to Legacy Dialogs, and I'm going to choose a bar graph. And I want simple, and then I'm going to define my groups. In this instance, we're going to define our bar height similar to what was done in the table. We're going to choose a outcome variable. So in this instance, something like hours watching TV or number of nights in the evening at bars. So in this instance, I want my bars to represent the mean, the median, or the mode. So notice that it says example, mean. So I'm going to go with nights spent at bar first. And this is an ordinal level variable. So we don't want the mean. Notice that when you place your variable in this box, it tells you what statistic the bars represent and then which variable you've chosen inside the parentheses. So this says we want a mean. We want to change that. So I'm going to click the Change Statistic button, and I'm going to go into median. That's how you compare ordinal level variables across medians. Click Continue. And for my category axis, this is the groups I want. So for in this instance, this is the groups I want. So for instance, marital status would go here. So in this example, what we're doing is we're comparing the median levels of nights spent at bars across different groups. So a hypothesis might be marital status affects time spent at bars in the evening. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. In the output window has my bars. And what I want to do here is I want to double click. I want to get my specific values, so I click the Show Data Labels button. Close, close, and this is what I see. recall that 7 is never, 6 was once a year, and so notice that never married has the lowest value or the lowest median for the group. But what that means is they go out to bars more often at night, and then divorced people, and then separated people. Whereas married and widowed people typically never go out to bars because their medians are 7. So I click here, and so this is one way to get a median comparison among groups. We can do the same thing with mean, or even mode if we choose. So if I go to Legacy Dialogues bar under the graphs function, click define. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to other statistic. I'm going to click inside the box. And when I click inside the variable box, the change statistic button populates, and I can click it and I can choose the mode. So if I did want to compare the mode of the groups, I could with a graph function, but not in the compare means table function. So I click OK, and then I go to show data labels, and the mode for every group is 7. So never is the most popular option for going out at bars at night among all people, regardless of their marital status. So for another example, I want to compare hours spent watching TV per day. I'll choose Graphs, Legacy Dialogues, bar, simple, define. And this time I want to click in the variable box and move it out back to the list of variables, and go down one variable, hours per day watching TV, and move that variable in. And notice when you move a new variable in, it changed the statistic that was requested. It saw that it was a scale variable, and when it does that, it automatically makes it a mean. And this is what I want, mean hours per day watching TV for each group. And we'll leave the marital status group, but you could change this out. Actually, let's change this. Let's change it to respondent, let's see, family income category. So family income category, there's 4 categories here. Click OK. Let me click my values, show data labels. So there we go. So the average hours per day watching TV for someone in a family who makes less than $20,000 is 3.8 hours. The average hours per day for someone in a family that makes $20,000 to $40,000 is 3.165. The average hours per day for someone who is in a family between $40,000 and $75,000 is 2.374, and the average hours per day for someone in a family of $75,000 or more is 2.285. So the pattern here looks like the more money the family makes, the less time the respondent has to watch TV. So this method gives you the mean comparison, right? Same as with the table, which was one form, and this just gives you a graphical representation of the same kind of information that you could create in a table.